Morning, everybody. So my name's Lucy Tarleton. I'm a director in PwC's capital markets team and head up the IPO origination for the UK firm. And I'm delighted to be here this morning to chair this Women in Investing panel, which hopefully will be quite a thought-provoking session. Before we introduce the speakers, I just wanted to say that in my day job, I spend a lot of time with investment banks, law firms, private company CEOs, CFOs, and the majority of which are all male. And also within PwC, certainly the more senior you get, the more male-dominated it is. And that's surprising given that, well, it's not really that surprising, but given that 48% of our workforce are actually female, and when you get to the partner level, certainly on a global perspective, only 19% of partners within the firm are actually female. Also, we were one of the first organisations to publish our gender pay gap. So for 2017, it was 13.7% for the firm without partners. When you include the partners, it increases significantly to 43.8%, which is quite a staggering increase. So, and obviously, I just wanted to start the session with that to sort of set the scene, because obviously with the pay gap, and we're not the only firm who has quite large gender pay gaps, that impacts on the disposable income and the wealth that females will have. So on the panel this morning, I wanted to discuss that, is it really just the fact that women have less disposable income, or are there other factors at play that might be why there are fewer women investors? Before we get into the detail, I just wanted to ask the panel if they could introduce themselves to you this morning.
So I'm Tamzin Freeman, and today we run PIWORLD, which obviously is in the investing world, and I find it very male-dominated. My background is in advertising and publishing, which interestingly is a much more female-dominated world, although again, at the top, you tend to find that there are more men in the top positions. So I'm here really to represent the retail investor.
I'm Leon Boros. I run a corporate finance boutique, and also I'm a private investor. I'm probably the only guy on the panel, so oh, sorry. So I've been obviously asked for my special insights on the subject.
My name is Judith MacKenzie. I am a woman. I am in finance. I am a partner at Downing LLP, and we are investors in UK smaller businesses. And I've been in this industry, dare I say it, for about 24 years, and have lived in the days when it certainly was a misogynist community in financial services. It's still, the majority of my peer group are male, but it's not, good to say, it's not quite as misogynist as it was. I'm not going to go into any of the stories from 24 years ago, but it was sometimes very much like a Benny Hill sketch, where I felt I was running away from situations that were actually quite uncomfortable. I'm very, very pleased to say that's not the way it is now, and I think we're going to be able to cover off some of the agenda points for something, a very, very topical subject.
Thanks, everybody. So I've got a few questions to ask, but I want to involve yourselves. So if, as we go along, we've got about an hour, but if there are questions that you want to ask as the discussion evolves, then please do just put your hands up. I don't think we've got any roving mics, so please do just shout a little bit. So to start with, so we've talked a bit about diversity already, but do we think there is diversity within the investment community? I think we know the answer, but perhaps is that improving? Judith, perhaps you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think it is. We have 15 partners, and well, gosh, there's 2 of us that are female, so that's an improvement from quite a few years ago. And I think from, even just from, if you look at our investment teams, we're finding that there are more candidates, female candidates coming through. And I will talk about it no doubt later, but this really has to start at the grassroots level. And it's very healthy. Some of the benefits, I think, of having women in investing and that balance is it helps in performance.
Okay, Leon.
Well, there's a number of good female investment managers coming through, or that are setting up their own funds. So that's an encouraging, very encouraging development. And certainly, anecdotally, I just see a lot more women at events like this and at the recent UK Investor Show. So I think things are improving, but we're a long way from parity.
Tamzin, would you agree with what Leon said?
Well, I think in the retail perspective, the room here is dominated by men, I think. How many women are in the room? Hands up? Okay, it's not bad, but it's still a dominance of men in the room. And I'm not sure why that is, but I wonder whether it's something to do with risk and whether women are less inclined to take risk, and whether people generally, both male and female, perceive that to do their own investing is a risky proposition and maybe other people can do it better. So it would be great if there was equal gender in the room here today.
Thanks. So obviously, Tamzin just mentioned that one of the reasons why there might be fewer investors is because of the risk profile. But is it that women's attitude to risk, or is it deeper than that? Is it around confidence, or is it around female makeup and that's just how we are, that's why we don't do this, or is it because there's other factors at play? Perhaps start with Leon this time.
Well, the odd thing is that although women are understood to take less risk, most of the research shows that whether as retail investor or as fund managers, they actually outperform male investors, and it's in some ways ironic, but actually, I've often felt that men, partly because of testosterone, we will tend to take more risks, we will drive markets, we will overvalue blue sky opportunities, whereas I think women take a longer term view, they do take less risk, and when faced with meltdown, they're actually, research shows, calmer than men who will rush to take actions which in themselves can be quite risky. So I think it's strange that so few women want to do it in an area they're actually very well suited for.
No, I think that's a very, very good point. But we all of us as fund managers and investors, as you know, get judged on a very short-term basis. And that is quite a brutal thing to have to face up to, especially in your early career. We've all had profits warnings, we've all had mistakes. And when you are literally being judged on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and you've got stars and stripes and whatever badges that you're winning or otherwise or losing as a fund manager, it's quite a brutal place to be. And what I found is when we're coaching, nurturing our young fund managers coming through, the first time they experience that profits warning in a company that they've invested in, whether they be male or female, they are literally, as good fund managers, pretty devastated. And they have to react accordingly. They have to go back to the investment case and they have to make a decision on what to do. And that, it builds a bit of a thick skin. And I think women don't tend to have the same kind of confidence and kind of ballsy nature just to fight their way through it. And therefore, my job is to make sure that the women, young women in our team, have that confidence. We've got a team mentality. Everybody's got a very sort of, everybody's got a voice. There's an open forum, and the support network is there because it's a really, really tough industry to be in. I started off in a much, much larger company with an Aberdeen asset, and it is, investment committees are very testosterone driven and difficult places to be, and don't necessarily tend to fit the profile of a woman who might be a little bit more risk averse and is not quite as confident in terms of putting themselves forward for whatever reasons.
Thank you. Could I just correct this idea that women are, from the data, are better investors than men? And because what has happened is you've selected a smaller portion of the women, assuming women and men are equal, you've selected the top portion against men. I can compare this when I went to university, we're talking a long while ago, at Cambridge, only 3 of the colleges were women's colleges. So naturally, the women, in order to get into Cambridge, were highly selected compared to men. It was not surprising women did better in the tripos than men on average. But now that men and women are equal, they're pretty well equal. It's a selection bias. It may be women are better, but we don't know yet until we have equal numbers.
I don't really mind who's better. That's not what it's about. It's just about more women investing. And, you know, the room here, or if I go to any investing event, I tend to be one of a few women. And that's what's important. It doesn't really matter who's better. I hope everyone's equally good.
Well, I know you're a better investor than me, Tamzin, and that's
I can't say that.
That's proven in. There's a competition called the Stock Challenge competition, and Tamzin I think was in the top 15 last year, top 20 this year. I'm miles behind, and so. I mean, I don't know about the stats, but all I know is that when I think about what successful investing entails, which is not overpaying, not getting carried away, understanding risk, then intuitively, I think it feels to me right that women have have a greater proportion of those skills. And the other thing is, you know, I meet a lot of management teams, and the other thing that comes over to me very strongly is that part of the return you get is being able to read people and understand people and look for the non-verbal communication cues. And men, I can be sat in a meeting with a group of guys, and it just amazes me how much information we miss. And often it's great to have Tamzin and other women in the audience, because they will tend to pick up things that we're missing out on. And that all adds to giving an improved return over the years.
Judith, you had a great story about coming out of the meeting.
Yeah. We were talking earlier, and just going back to Leon's point and how, I mean, people are different and people pick up different things. So this is not necessarily a story about how I'm a better judge of character than maybe one of my male colleagues, but we were in a meeting, and it was just an ordinary kind of results meeting, company that we knew well. We're cantering through the numbers, cantering through how the business was going, markets, margins, etc. Just a pretty bog standard meeting. And I've got to say, halfway through the meeting, I was like, something I'm not, I can't say specifically what it was, because it would be wrong for me to do so. But there was something that was just beginning to bug me about the body language of the chief exec, the way he was answering questions. I was like, so blindingly obvious that he's very uncomfortable about a route of questioning that I was going down. And he was very I felt he was very defensive about it. So we came out of the meeting, said goodbye to the folk at the lift, and my two male colleagues and myself started to walk back to our office, and I said, well, God, bloody hell, that was so obvious, wasn't it? He was lying, wasn't he? And they went, what are you talking about? I've completely missed the way I had read the situation. And they went back to the numbers said this, and that's factual, and therefore, whereas they were not, they might have been sitting there doing the numbers, but they weren't necessarily sitting looking at how somebody was reacting to what I was asking. And that's our job. We're fund managers. You can read it, report and accounts, you can do all the numbers, you can do all the crunching, you can do whatever, but ultimately we're making a judgment call on people. And I do think, dare I say it, we're sometimes a bit better at reading situations. Take a bit longer to do it sometimes, but we're better at reading body language and the way people communicate than guys are. But ultimately, it's all about a diversified team, in my view. I bring something to it, the guys bring something to it. If we have no agenda and no ego, then actually we all get the best out of each other. It's not about me being better or the guys being better than anybody else, going back to that point.
Just picking up on that and the sort of the team aspect. So Judith has talked about her team and the approach, so if with the profit warning and sort of being around the actual individual when it didn't quite go according to plan. But if you're an individual retail investor, you obviously don't have that that team or that sort of the rest of the fund management team there. So Tamzin, do you think how do you think sort of the retail investor deals with that situation? And you also had some interesting research that you found on sort of safety and
Well, the safety research goes back to women's perception or girls' perception of themselves in school age. And this is a thing about confidence and self-belief, I think. and girls have a lower opinion of their ability in maths, even though they score the same grade in a test. Which, coming back to what Judith says, when you're a fund manager, it's bad enough being a retail investor, but when you're a fund manager and you've got other people's money at stake and your job at stake and there's a profit warning, it really challenges self-belief. And I did pick up various pieces of research that basically says innately men have more confidence until proven wrong, and women have no confidence until proven right. So it makes it a different animal to be dealing with, and it makes it different when you're coaching people on a team as to what you have to give to men and what you have to give to women. So that answers the second part of your question. What was the first part of your question about?
It was more around with Judith was sort of mentioning when something went wrong with sort of the mentality, the support network that there is in terms of dealing with that when you're part of a group of investors, as it were.
I think it's important to be part of a group of investors. So you take your own view on the bits that you can see, but my accountancy skills aren't brilliant. I'm sure many men would be much better at that than I am. And so I find it very helpful if, say, Leon points out something that on the return on capital employed, or what's a new accountancy law going to do to the profit and loss account. I find all of that really, really helpful because that's not my strength. So to work as part of a team where people do have other strengths to you is really valuable. So love working with men on those sort of things because they're very good at that. Not that women aren't, but...
I'm reminded of my eldest daughter, who had her first boyfriend when she was 16, and she was worried about her maths GCSE, and this young lad, partly to impress me and to impress her, said, "Don't worry, Leon, I'll help her out." Well, she ended up getting an A star. He got a C, which exactly supports your view that only when she got the A star did she confirm in her own mind that she might actually be quite good at this.
Oh gosh, there's quite a few questions. I think the gentleman
next to you, Anne.
Next.
An observation to also maybe read across to some of the points that Leon and Judith raised. So I work in a global e-commerce company, and what we've realized is that IQ is a lot less important than it used to be in the age of AI and algorithms and machines. Humans don't tend to win very often. And so emotional intelligence is actually the most important thing we look for, because it helps you think differently about problems you need to solve for customers. It helps you build better teams to have better outcomes. When I look at investing, I'm seeing the likes of Stockopedia creating a much more level playing field in terms of algorithms making decisions. And I really believe that it's the emotional intelligence, that read, which is really where the edge is. So I'd hope to see, as algorithms take more control, that more and more women realize that they tend to over-index in that category, and they're going to do better and better.
Thank you. There was another question just next.
Just a comment and kind of a question. I was an analyst in the city and I quit without even having kids because the lifestyle was horrible. Has there any progress been made in sort of improving the day-to-day life of people in the industry? Because it is frequently really bad. Yeah,
that's a very good question. Judith, do you want to start?
I think you probably have a harder job than I have, to be honest. The good thing about fund management is a lot of what we do is reading, writing, thinking, meeting management teams. And I suppose one of the reasons Downing's not a small business anymore. We've got about $1 billion under management. We're at 140 people. But when I joined, there was only 18. And it meant that I suppose I was being trusted by my fellow partners, but I've got a bit more flexibility, which is really important from a personal perspective, but also from a professional perspective, because I want to be able to shut myself away in a room and think about something after I've met a management team. I think on the deal doing side, which we'll probably talk about in a second, the industry is horrendous. So on the sell side, so analysts and corporate finance, I think the lifestyle is exceptionally challenging. Long hours, midnight, disappearing off on deals, whatever, which I don't think is conducive to anybody's life, a good lifestyle and balance, never mind anything else. And that's still there. I think it's slightly different in fund management now, fortunately.
Well, certainly from our perspective and the team that I work in, we're a deals team. So I personally don't get involved in the execution of transactions anymore, but certainly those around me, they're there till goodness knows what time in the morning. So it is definitely not conducive to having a sort of a family lifestyle. And nothing has really changed there. And certainly as a firm, we are desperately trying to improve that. And we have got flexi working, etc. But in a deal environment, it is very difficult to balance that. And people do struggle, particularly when they're trying to balance the sort of the work and the life. So you do find that, going back to sort of the gender pay bit, that sort of certainly the females are the ones who still have to sort of sacrifice their career and go and work for, look after the family. There were some more questions. There was a gentleman at the back who was raising his hand quite a few times.
I suppose looking at it from a purely simplistic perspective, firstly, I think that individuals should be rewarded on merit, irrespective of a whole host of parameters, gender being one. I was going to say, is it not a matter of interest, having interest in the subject, and making people, firstly providing the opportunity, and then making an awareness of the opportunity, and then for the individual to have an interest. If they're interested in something, they tend to do it more. If they do it more, they usually get better, and the better they get, the more they do it. So you have the virtuous circle. So that perhaps might be a very simplistic view as to why there are more males, why fund management and financial services tends to be a male-dominated industry, as opposed to men being better, which I don't believe is the case. It just means perhaps that men have a greater interest in that particular aspect of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, a question for each of you on the panel. Why do you all invest?
Because you get better returns than giving somebody else your money. But I don't know that that's particularly well known. And I think as a woman, I've had to take it slowly to start to get to that point. So for the first 3 years that I was seriously investing, I didn't make particularly great returns. I didn't lose money, but I didn't make great returns. And then I learned from my mistakes and I got better and better. But I think there's a misperception amongst men and women that money's scary and you give it to somebody else to look after. And there's a perception that they will probably do a better job than you. And when you first start, there's an awful lot of books that back that up and say that, you know, it's a difficult world for asset managers, so why should you be able to do it any better? So there's a lot out there that makes you think it's very risky and very dangerous. And why would you want to risk your long-term security by doing it yourself? But I think the opposite is absolutely true. And more people are going to have to do it while the government are going to reduce pensions, and while fund management isn't exactly performing in a place where the interest rates are very low at the moment. I don't think it's a very good environment for asset managers. Not in Judith's place, but I mean more broadly in pension providers is what I'm saying.
I suppose I invest because of the money, but actually, I mean, money is really only a measure of success, and really the thing that gives me the greatest satisfaction is the intellectual stimulation I get from it, and the fact that, you know, you will take a view on something and it's very rewarding to get it right. And as long as you get it right more often than you get it wrong, then you're going to make money. And then you get the second problem, which is, am I actually then going to spend the money that I've actually made, or am I going to pass it on to that chap who thought he was really good at maths?
Thank you. It's a bit of a deep question. I was sitting here panicking about how I'm going to answer it. But I really enjoy it. It's a puzzle. It's a problem to solve. There's a market, and it is about making money. Of course it is. And the biggest pleasure that we get is making money for our investors and then going out to see our investors. It's a long-term game for us, and the way we do things is slightly different. We've got a lot of engagement with management teams. and it feels as though you're working in partnership with those management teams to get the kind of returns that we believe you can get out of this area of the market in terms of small cap. And it's also really inefficient. So it is like putting the bits of a jigsaw together. And it's just good fun. And I've found it good fun since I think I was about 9.
Wow, gosh, it's a long time.
It's not that long.
No, not that long. No.
I'm a man and old.
Apologies, Judith. Moving on quickly. So, gentleman over here.
I'm an engineer by training, and we're seeing changes in the engineering industry. They're very slow. The major institution, the IET, engages quite a lot now with schools and trying to make sure that girls, and I guess all of you except Leon perhaps were girls once. I think we've got to go right back to school and to maths and physics and making that much more accessible to women. And my question is, I can see moves in the engineering industry. Is the finance and investment industry doing anything to engage with younger people?
Who wants to take that one first?
I'll have a stab. I mean, not formally, but I absolutely agree. It's got to be from grassroots up. And we've got to have role models, and we've got to educate why it is fun to be an investor. So we do go out into schools. We get involved with young enterprise. It takes quite a bit of time. It's a bit of hassle as well, to be honest, but it's really quite rewarding. I specifically go to universities, and we'll go to their investor clubs, which tend to be mostly guys, but spend time with the young ladies within those teams, and just give them an idea of actually it's not quite as daunting coming into finance, coming into fund management. If you go down the traditional, and I've heard some horror stories from some of these 21, 22-year-olds that are going on what's called the milk rounds, where they'll go to a milk round day for financial services and fund management. They're almost put through some kind of strange training course initiation at that stage. You know, they're effectively told that they're going to have an internship where they're going to be working different departments until 2 in the morning. It's going to be horrible. And some large fund management companies actually pride themselves on how brutal their internships are. That's not the right way to go about things. So we're really keen to get in at the grassroots. I mean, it's a tiny amount that we can do because we're a small firm, but actually make sure that that people know that you can come into fund management, and it doesn't need to be that testosterone-driven scenario that historically it has been.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that? I would say that as a firm, I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, that certainly when we take the graduates in at the start of their career with us, it's basically a 50-50 split. What we are doing, though, is that we're partnering with a number of the universities and actually working with students and actually supporting them through their university degree. So when they graduate, they actually come out with a degree and an accountancy qualification, so they hit the ground running a lot sooner than going to university, getting a degree, then doing your accountancy qualification.
What proportion of those people are male, and what
proportion? It's about 50-50. So it is pretty equal at that level. It's only when we see the difference as you move through the ranks within the firm. This gentleman at the front.
Just a sort of word about character traits that receive praise or not. Some of the most famous women, not exactly in finance, but in the world of wider finance at the moment, are people like Janet Yellen, Christine Lagarde, and so on. And you might say they're admired partly because they're perceived as being safe pairs of hands, maybe steady as she goes type of character traits. And that type of thing, we see it with politicians sometimes. Angela Merkel seems to be a safe pair of hands. And is that a character trait that is praised a bit more in women than it is in men? Whereas in men, the more thrusting sort of characteristics, shall we say, that what receives praise in men, and these are stereotypes. And are we just in a sort of culture where the world of finance isn't very exciting to women because it doesn't look like it fits with their image of what they want to be.
Tamzin?
I'm not sure about that, but I think that education historically has played a part, that women have not grown up thinking they could be engineers, and they weren't really encouraged necessarily to go into accountancy. But in terms of management being seen to be a safe pair of hands, when I've met management, I could see both men and women could be given that title depending who it was. And I think it's a character trait that isn't gender specific.
I agree with that. I just think that in the media, it's sometimes portrayed that people like Janet Yellen and Christine Lagarde, their virtues are that they're safe pairs of hands.
Yeah, well, the media portrays a lot of things.
Yeah.
Thanks. So you're all investors, obviously, that's why you're sitting on this panel. But what is the importance of sort of diversity and gender diversity in the investments that you make yourselves? Leon, start with you.
None. I think, I'm encouraged that there's more women joining boards. I think that's a good thing. I think it will probably give a better overall perspective. I mean, I'm mainly involved in the small cap world, and there it's really a judgment about the people. And, I'm looking for honest people and talented people, and whether they're men or women, I don't really mind. I suppose when it comes down to money, you put aside any kind of political correctness, and you think, well, which team are going to work for me? That said, I don't see this male and female thing as a black and white. It's really a continuum of terms of traits. And I suppose when I look at the managers who've done best for me, they're generally not the super aggressive male field testosterone boss who's very good at selling. They tend to be they tend to have some humility. They tend to be aware of the downside risks, and I suppose I naturally gravitate to them. But I don't look at the boards of directors and think to myself, right, they've got 4 out of 8 who are women, and therefore tick box, it's going to be a good investment.
Yeah, I mean, I hate a quota. There's nothing worse than having or feeling as though you have to have a diversity person on your board or whatever. It is quite sad, though, that there are not that many non-execs, female non-execs, coming through the ranks. It's kind of the same old ones. I believe people should be there on merit, not necessarily because of what sex you are. And it's all about going back to that gene pool. It's about widening, making sure we've all got responsibility to make sure that that gene pool is widened for non-execs, for management teams, FDs. We've got some really good female FDs within our portfolio, and they're great at the job that they do, and of course they are. They're there because of merit, but I want to make sure that at some stage we might be able to use them as a non-exec on a company as they go forward through their career. So that's my responsibility, to make sure that we're there to point them, nurture, mentor, and point in the right direction. But there really is not enough of a gene pool that you can pick from at the moment. And if I think of our boards, actually, I can't think of one female non-exec on any of our investments, which is pretty sad, isn't it?
Question, sorry.
I beg to differ with that. I run a non-executive recruitment firm, and we're running at about 40% of our placements are women, and they're extremely high caliber. I'm quite intrigued by the percentage of AIM companies that have all male boards. I think it's around 30%. And I was having a conversation with Luke Johnson, who runs Patisserie Valerie, and I asked him why he had an all-male board, and wouldn't it be better to have a woman on the board? And he looked a bit perplexed, and he said, I've never, ever had a shareholder or an institution ever tell me that they'd like to see me have a woman on the board. And so I then asked him, what percentage of your customers are women? And he said, probably 60%. And I said, wouldn't it be beneficial to have a member of one of your major stakeholders on the board? And he said, yes, it would. I'll think about it.
Yeah, telling.
So there's a lot to be done.
There's a lot to be done.
But I really do say that there are a huge number of extremely capable women who.
So can I ask a question back? Are you, over the last, you've been probably doing this for a few years, over the last sort of 5-10 years, have you seen that that pool growing? Is it changed dramatically over the last?
Absolutely, hugely. 10 years ago, women didn't like to put their name down. They didn't like to apply for roles. They're much more confident, and they are now, but we find that we do have to work with women and actually encourage them to apply for roles. And you know, I constantly look at CVs and I think, wow, this is a pretty outstanding lady, and probably better than and some of the men that we're putting forward, but they do lack a bit of confidence sometimes and do need some encouragement.
No doubt you'll come and have a chat later. Sell your wares.
There's a lady here who's got a question.
So I applied for my daughter to go to one of the, or a number of the competitive London schools when, you know, entry. And I was interested to see that what was the most predictive thing of the long-term outcome of the girl's success was what the mother did. They weren't particularly interested in seeing the father. They wanted to interview me. And they wanted to see, you know, did I have a career? What kind of career? How successful I was. Because the London schools, you know, these top-ranking schools, felt unanimously that that was the key predictive thing, number one. Number two, I think, when we're talking about role models, so my background is as a psychologist, and I know that probably the most powerful predictive factor of what happens to children is their home environment. The schools do a lot, but it's the parenting that does make a tremendous difference to what happens. The conversations that go on at home. If they have a mother who goes and they do this kind of job, and they find it exciting and interesting, that serves as a role model. And it's also, you know, they see that it's interesting. They start to think it's a possibility for them to do that kind of thing. It opens their eyes to things that they wouldn't otherwise think about. It's discussed at home. Musicians tend to come from musical families, not because they're talented, but because they're exposed to that as a possibility. There is a pool of women like me who didn't do this as a background, only came to it later on. And if more of those women, which don't get discussed, so they're not the 20s, you know, they're not just starting out, but they're people that have other careers, as men have other careers, and they think, actually, while I'm doing this other career, you know, my dad also invests, and he does a completely different sort of job. If that pool of women then started to invest and take an interest, as I have, it then brings into the mind of the daughter, oh, actually, hang on, there's this that I can do that might be interesting. And it might also be about thinking about how to target women who are already employed in other jobs, but might have a sideline in learning how to invest. And I think that that would be a very powerful thing in changing the mindsets of their daughters.
That's interesting insight. Does anyone have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, well, we've got to all be responsible for finding and nurturing any age. It doesn't need to be a 22-year-old or 25-year-old. I come across some really good CVs I've deliberately, not that I don't like using headhunters, but I've deliberately gone out to try and find women at a kind of operational level within our private companies that we have on our private equity side of the business, and going to them to say, if you thought about getting involved in PLCs or mentoring of companies. And it's amazing, they pretty much go, well, no, I haven't. Well, why would I do, you know? And But after 45 minutes worth of me selling why it would be a good and personally good thing for them to do, they lift their heads. But that's a whole generation and a whole flock of good managers that wouldn't even be thinking about it unless somebody knocks on their door. So yeah, it's our responsibility to get out there, and we clearly benefit from it as well.
I totally agree with what you're saying, and I do think that today it's much easier to invest. There's so much information out there that we can all benefit from, and I'd say it shouldn't just be your daughter, it should be your son as well. It should be both genders, you know, getting involved in investing for their own money, for their own future, their own financial security.
I think also with the rise of all the technology platforms and the sort of robo-advisors, and with the younger generation being a bit more au fait with technology, then that does provide an opportunity for them to get involved more easily and quickly.
Thanks. Just touching on back the points this lady made about women being a role model for their daughters, and then looping back to what you were saying earlier, Lucy, about how your current intake is actually 50-50, but when you get to the top, it's much lower. Perhaps this is one for you and Judith. You know, what policies are your firms implementing to make life easier for working mothers
and working fathers?
Well, yeah, and what are you doing to make sure that the men take that paternity leave thing?
We've got quite a good example in our team. 26-year-old fund manager. He's going to be, I think, a better fund manager than I will ever be. He's got empathy. He's good with numbers. He's learning. He's going to make some mistakes. I'm really keen to keep hold of him. He came to see me with a shaky lip about a year ago. Oh, no, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And I thought he was going to resign, which was going to ruin my day and week and year, no doubt. And he, when he finally got the words out, he said, oh, I'm going to have twins. And I was a bit shocked, not as shocked as he was and not as shocked as his girlfriend was, but and through that path, I suppose, he had twins. They're now, I think, 9-10 months old. He is from Scotland. Not that I recruit everybody from Scotland, but anyway, he is from Scotland, and his girlfriend is also from Scotland. And he, again, came to me with a shaky lip about 6 months ago and said, oh, I think we're going to have to move back to Scotland, which, again, I was devastated at. But I said to him, I really want you to, do you enjoy working with us? Do you want to continue with your career with us? And we will provide you flexibility. So you can be home for a day looking after the twins, and his girlfriend worked with Aberdeen Asset. And so we're trying to find a way of adapting what our policy. We didn't have a policy in place. We're quite a small company, but we had the flexibility to look at that special situation and make sure it was right for the family, not just right for the mother, not just right for the husband, but actually the family in the way that they're able to get on and cope with it. Quite a difficult thing to get through HR and put in documents and contracts, etc. But you know, good on him, it's working, and he's got the flexibility that means he's still doing his job. He absolutely, you know, loves what he does, but he's also got that work balance that is important for everybody, whether they be male or female.
Yeah, and certainly from a PwC perspective, we're trying very hard to embrace the whole flexi working. So, and to Judith's point, it's not just about the mother, but it is about the whole family situation, circumstances. So with the use of technology, you don't have to be in the office all the time. So use of working from home, working from other offices. We have offices everywhere, so people don't have to come into the London office if they find it easier to go somewhere else. Certainly in my team, we are a deals-driven team, and it does make it actually pretty difficult, to be honest, and we haven't quite got it right, because we see people progressing quite well until sort of about senior manager level, but then when they go off, have their families, certainly from the female perspective, and coming back in, it does still seem to be very much that it's the mother who has to sacrifice her career and spend the time with the family. Even though we have got the shared parental leave scheme in operation with the firm, which is actually more complicated to operate and not necessarily financially beneficial to the family as it might sound. So we've still got some way to go. but we are trying, and it is something on very high up on the board's agenda. I think we are running out of time, so unless anyone has any urgent questions, I'll wrap up. No? So we've covered quite a lot of ground, which has been a very interesting debate. So we've covered sort of looking at whether women are actually better investors than men, looking at the performance of investments that women make. We've looked at the investment approach, discussed the investment approach that women take, looking at why are there potentially fewer women investors, and the need to sort of start early in terms of certainly around at school with educating girls to sort of get into investing. We've also touched on the psychology of investing as well. But I'd just like to ask the panel one final question in terms of, well, what more could be done to encourage more female investors? Again, it's another deep question.
Well, I suppose I could ask the question: how many of the men in the audience have brought their wives here? And I can ask the question because I have. So it's. But I suppose I find that I think a lot more men should be involving their wives in both events like this or meetings with management, because I think that to give them confidence that actually a lot of the qualities that they have can add and improve the investment decision.
In 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we're going to maybe bang into each other and say, remember we talked about women in finance. It will not be an agenda. It'll be a great thing because the direction of travel is there. It's on people's minds and we're heading in the right direction. So I think we all continue to think about it. And when you come across situations personally, make sure that if you're a passionate investor, tell people about it, whether male or female.
Being retail investors, I think we're in the minority anyway. If you go to a party and you talk to people about retail investing, they sort of glaze over and sort of want to move on to the next person very quickly. And I would just enjoy it if more and more people took more interest in their own future financial security.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Judith, Leon and Tamzin, for your time this morning.